Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today, Masechtas Chulin daf Lamed Zayin. We're going to begin on the top of Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph by the new Mishnah. Hasheichet esem mesukenas. Let's say a person shechs, obviously a kosher animal, but it's mesukenas. It's an animal that's in danger of its life. So in this situation, we want to make sure that at least it has enough life in it so that it's not considered to be a treif. Sheben Gamaliel Omer ad shetif charis biyad v'regel. So we mentioned pirchos, which actually is a major distinction, and on some level a kula for Klal Yisrael as opposed to an akum, is that because we matter shchita, as long as there's pirchos, the animal is moving on some level, and it has some ability to do something, that in itself is enough reason to be able to establish it as still viable. So as long as it's able to move its foot and its arm, so then at that point we say it is acceptable. Says Rashi, "Lo mifreches kimuhu rabbanan dinitul nishmas kodim gemar shchitasa." So in other words, if it doesn't have the capacity to be able to even do this, then you know that it was already basically dead even before the shechita. So therefore, that's too far musukenes that it's not an animal that we can use. Rabbi Lezer Omer dayaim zinka. Interestingly enough, even if it doesn't move, but when it comes to healthy animals, when they're shechted, blood squirts out, and therefore that's what happens. Rashi says zinuk is kiluach. That's all is necessary. Let's say you shecht at night, an animal which is musukenas, that we require pirchos, and you don't know if it's reached that level or not. The next morning, you find that its throat is filled with blood. So then share why? Shezinka ukamidas rebelazar. There's clearly zinka that the blood squirted out. And as we said, according to Rebelazar, he's machshir as long as it's zinu. V'chachamim oimrim ad shetifachas o biad o b'regel. It doesn't need, like the shita of Hashem will, they have to move hand and leg, if you will, the fore and the hind leg, but either one, not both, but either one. Oh, even if you don't do that, ad shetich chashchesh biznava. If the tail is like wagging or shaking, that's also enough. Okay. Let's go straight to question 9, even in the middle of this Mishnah. Mahut soidis hapirchos de boy lumusukenes. So what is pirchos? So the Mishnah said 3 opinions. Rabbi Shmuel says it has to be the yad and the regel. Chachamim said the yad or the regel or even the tail, and Rabbi Lezer says zinuk, just the squirting out of blood. Okay. Now echa behemadach ve'echa behemagasa. So it doesn't make any difference apparently if it's a big animal or a small animal. Then apparently they argue the same way that they both need pirchos. However, behemadaka shepashti yada v'lechzir psula. If you have a behemadaka that at the completion of the shechita, it was able to stretch out its forearm but not return it, then it's possible. She'enu ela haitzas nefesh movad. So that's not any determination whatsoever. So therefore, when it comes to a behemadaka, it has to go back and forth. When do we say that we need pirchas at all? Is a shahisa b'chesas mesukenas. If it's an animal which is mesukenas. If it's, we assume it's just a regular healthy animal, you don't need to have any simanim. We just assume it's kosher, it's not a problem because it has a cheskas kashrus. So Rashi says that when it comes to back and forth, as the Mishnah said, that's only behemadaka. But the inference, as Rashi says, of agasa will have urcha b'hachi. It's not normal to stretch its leg out. So if it does, it is pirchos. And therefore, that's the kula by behemagasa, that if all it was pishat yadayim, that would be enough to consider it pirchos. So the Gemara asks, apparently Misukenes you could shecht. Now Misukenes mamai sharia. How do we know that even if there was pirchus, how do we know you could eat that type of meat? After all, this behema was Misukenes, was danger. His life was in danger. He was going to die. So mamai teisa gedait in the aser. What do you mean? You're asking Kasha, how do we know it's mutter? Why would you think that a musukenes is aser? It's alive. Why can't you just shecht the living animal? The pasuk says in Vayikra, Zoi sachaya asher toichlu. These are the animals in which you may eat. Chaya ochel v'sheinu chaya lo soich, which is mashma only if it's alive, right? But if it's not going to live, even if there is pirchus, maybe the pasuk saying you can't. So maybe you can actually infer from the pasuk that pirchus is aser. So that's the diak. V'ha musukenes enu chaya, because musukenes is not going to live. So how do we know? So now that the established point is musukenes should be aser. So now how do we know it's mutter? Because the pasuk in the Gemara says like this: nevelu soichel. Now when it comes to a nevela, an animal which let's say died without shchita, whatever, so in that case you can't eat it. Now why does it tell us that a nevela, which obviously you didn't do shchita, you did nothing, it just died on its own, that you can't eat it? Machlal, the musukenes sharia. So we can make a diak that as long as the animal was alive, and even though it was musukenes, and it had pirchus, so then you could eat it. These are going to musukenes tasira, it would be aser hashda. Mechayim asira lachamisam boy. If you're telling me an animal, okay, fine, it's musukenes, but it's alive. If an alive animal you can't eat, so then why would you even have to tell me about a nevela? It must be it's a good diak that you can only not eat a nevela, but maybe Utaka could eat musukenes. So therefore, that's a raya and support that musukenes is mutter. Okay, boy. No, 1 second. That's not necessarily proof. Maybe we render a musukenes the same status as nevela. It's the same idea. It's like a nevela that's dead, and the musukenes is basically dead. So maybe it's also aser. Well, let's talk about that. You can't make that jump. Because the pasuk says also in V'yikriyat Aleph, v'chi yamos min behema asher chayil lochem l'achla hanogim and nivlasa, etc. So if you have an animal in which technically you could eat, it's a kosher animal, however it died on its own. So if you touch its nevela, so what do we see? Well, it says kiyomos, right? When it dies, then only then it's a nevela. Mashma mechayim, even if it's musukenes, right? Even though it's musukenes, it's not a nevela, right? Loik nevela. No, but and there was not really approved. Mechayim basei liachmisa b'lav. By the case of musukenes, maybe it's an asay. And when it comes to lachamisa nevela, when it says lo soichel, so that's a lav. So maybe again, it's not a raya, not necessarily musukenes is mutter, just because nevela is aser, so must be musukenes is mutter. No, maybe musukenes is also aser. El medem rachmana treiful soich. So it says, okay, fine, we had difficulty about a nevela. How about a treifa? And Rashi gives a couple examples. I'm not sure why. Nikav krum shalmayach. Let's say there is a puncture in the membrane of the in the head and the brain. Oh, nechtechu ragleha michuserasi. That's like cut. Its leg was cut and it's missing. So mechlal the musukenes sharia. So maybe only a treifa is aser. However, musukenes is mutter, and that's a proof. These are going to musukenes nasira, hash musukenes telo mechasra. It's not missing a limb, for example. It's just dying. It's sick. Asira, so treifa, my boy. It's mamish missing a limb, so of course it should be aser. So therefore, it's a raya that only a treifa is aser, but musukenes is mutter. V'dil behind a treifa and musukenes, like we said before. V'level of basei v'loisasei. You can ask the same kasha. So im kain nevel dechas rachman alamali. So then you're going to say that by treifa. You can't say that also by nevela. So then why does it say by nevela? Ma machayim koyla habalav yaseh. So we say when it comes to it's alive, you get not saying a lav. V'lachar misa boy. So of course it's going to be a lav. So we're still not necessarily giving a good answer how I know Musukenes is mutter, because maybe you don't necessarily make the dik, only treifa is aser, only nevela is aser, but Musukenes is mutter. No, maybe Musukenes is the same thing as treifa and nevela. They're all aser. El mahacha. So instead, we're going to try our best to come up with a new answer. So look at Rashi. Hainu nevela, hainu treifa, hainu Musukenes. Kolamer afilu benivla shemeisel achar shenitrafa. Let's say it became a nevela after there was a treifa. There was something wrong with the lungs, for example. Venis tachna matzi mukmasla fil hachi yitzrach lemekum lehal misa mishnei lavin lav the nevela lav the treifa v'yaseh the chayil echad. So again, it's possible you can violate all of them at the same time. El mahacha v'chela nevela v'chela treifa yasel chamalacha v'achlo sochluhu. When it comes to the fats on the meat, on the nevela, or the fats of a treifa, so it's not aser b'hana. However, you can't eat it. Yom Ramar l'may hilchasa amar Torah. Why is the Torah telling us din after you can't eat the treifa, you can't eat the nevela anyway? So of course you're not going to eat the chaylev. So yavo iser nevela v'yichal iser chaylev. Yavo iser treifa v'yichal iser chaylev. It's coming to tell you that not only would you have violated, if you did eat the chaylev, would you have violated the isser of eating chaylev, these fats, but also you violated treifa or nevela. Now Rashi points out a very important detail, that Patar Amr de Chayiv Mishum Shnei Lavin, Mishum Lav de Chaylev, Mishum Lav de treifa. The lo tema in isser chal isser. So this pasuk tells us otherwise. Normally we don't just start piling on isurim. We don't say that. We don't say one isser and another isser. Like, what's the point? If it's usser, it's usser. What's the point? Unless the pasuk is telling you that even normally ein isser chal isser. However, in this case we say otherwise. So we have this pasuk again that you could violate treifa and chaylev at the same time. Lamed zayin amid beis. And v'yisachadaituch treifa hainu musukenes. You want to tell me it's the same thing? So just mention about chaylev of nevela. Yasno chomolacha. The chaylev treifa lo sochluhu, and it'll say the chaylev the treifa don't eat. Yano Amina would know. Ma machayim when it comes to musukenes, asi iser treifa, chayil iser chaylev, so lachem isim a boy. Elam in the kasav rachmana nevela mechlal the treifa lav hainu musukenes. The fact that it mentions nevela must be when it mentions treifa, it's not musukenes, and therefore we're not going to compare musukenes to treifa. We're not going to compare musukenes to nevela. Not only nevela and treifa is going to be aser, musukenes taka is mutter. So maskim from Rabashi v'dilmo oymimela chaynu treifa hainu musukenes v'dika amrit nevela the kasav rachmana lamli. So why does it mention by nevela? Lahach nevela do asi mekayach musukenes. Maybe we're talking about the nevela doesn't come from the koyach of musukenes. What is that? Shiasa gistra. Let's say the animal was never dying. It was never musukenes, but you did gistra. And Rashi before learned two reasons. Either is the issue of derasa, but really the most pashut idea of gistra is the animal split into two. So this is also so apparently it's not a case of musukenes, right? Or that's not true. Hasam nami yevsher the loy having musukenes port them kmei to live sakul ruba. So it's kind of an interesting thing. So even though it's true you're splitting it right in the middle, but at one moment for a split second before it was killed, while you were doing gistera, it became musukenes. Then of course it died right afterwards. So therefore, it's not necessarily the case. Again, we're saying really treifa is the same thing as musukenes. So, but we're talking about a situation. So again, why does it mention? It's possible that it could be a nevela without being musukenes. So he said it's not true. You can't be a nevela without being musukenes, even for a small amount of time. So basically, we're establishing that that's an acceptable answer. So again, basically the idea is that by treifa and nevela, by chela, by treifa and chela and nevela, we say dafka there, but when it comes to mesukenes, it's mutter. The Yibboy say another answer. Imkein lema kra lema chela nevela v'treifa chela v'lamali. So why does it have repeat it? Zu shein chel b'choluk mebisra. Only in this situation we say there's no difference between the fat and its meat, because you can't eat the chelav and you can't eat bus or treifa, you can't eat bus and nevela. However, because you could eat the meat, you can't eat the fat. So therefore, that's the extent. That's a second answer. The boy say a third approach. Mahacha. The pasuk in Yecheskel says, "Yomer Hashem Elokim hini nafshi lo matoma," that my soul did not become impure in the veil of a treiful chalti, and I'm someone that I'm so impressive that I never ate nevel, I never ate treifa. It's like, okay, why is that a reason to brag? Minurai viadata, from when I was a kid until now. Okay, that could be somewhat of an impressive thing, that you always kept kosher, right? You live in New York, it's hard to get non-kosher foods, and every restaurant's kosher. It's like, what is he bragging about? V'lo mepi basar pigel, and never went into my mouth meat of pigel, which of course is usher to eat because it's an improper machshava about a carbon that a kohen made. Hini nafshi lo matoma. So what does that mean? That my soul never became impure. Shul hiharti b'yoyin b'tuma b'layla. I never had an improper thought during the day, which would have led me to an improper thought to become tamei at night, carry, etc. In other words, I always had the discipline to be careful with my thoughts all the time, because what you think of and what you do during the day will impact the rest of your life. Will impact your night. V'neveil v'treiful ochalti menurai. I never ate any treifas and nevelas. Sholchalti basar kais ma'olim. What does that mean? So Rashi says, what does it mean that he never ate kos? So Rashi says, shachot. Shalot tomus, someone says, shecht it quick, right? Quickly, so that before it dies. Obviously, the fact that he didn't eat tray for nevela is not much of a chiddush. I never went to McDonald's my whole life. Shkoyach, okay? All right, big deal. Right? That's something, but this is obviously something bigger. So he said that I never ate mesukenas. Even though, again, obviously, there's a raya that mesukenas must be mutter, but nonetheless he didn't do it. Lobafi basar pigel sholchalti mibehema shahira b'chacham. That I never, pigel is like a machshava. So I never ate something in which you had to ask a rabbi, is this good or not good? Even if he said, yeah, it's fine, but the fact that it was even a suffix, I distanced myself from that too. That I never ate from an animal in which the proper tithes were not taken off. So Rashi says, this is referring to Azor v'Elachai v'Keva. These are the parts, the maw, paw, and jaw, as my Rabbi Gibber used to say. And those parts are actually given to the Kohen anyway. So what's the chiddush? So if you're not a Kohen, you can't eat it. So Rashi points out, so he's a Kohen. So technically, if you hold, let's say, Matana Shulhorma Kamisha Hermidamian, so the fact is, even if he doesn't separate, he's allowed to eat it anyway. So the fact is, he wanted to make sure it was separated first. So Yamar Bishlam Sharia Hana Rebusa de Yecheskel. El Yamar the Sira they can't have Sukenes, so my Rebusa de Yecheskel, right? There's obviously no Chiddush. So obviously the Chiddush is that, yeah, it's good. Okay, question 10. Nevela Treifel Chalti V'Lobel B'Fi Basar Pigel. So what was he saying? Okay. So first of all, Treifel Nevela means Musukenes. He never ate Musukenes. And Pigel means he never ate from an animal which there was a Chacham had to have kash on it, or the sacrificial parts of the kohen given to the kohen were never eaten from me. Okay, so that's again, he could have eaten from me, he didn't. Okay. So that's the Chedesh. That's question 10. So, Heichidami Misukenes. So, what exactly is Misukenes? Even though our mission talked about it. So, Amar Yehuda Marav, Kol Shema Midanaisa Ve'eno Oimenes. So, here we have a new reason, is that if you cause the animal to stand up, you want it to stand up, but it's not able to, even with your encouragement, you urge it to stand and it doesn't. So, obviously, that animal's got problems. Rabbi Chanina Bar Shlami Mishmei the Rabbi Imrafilo Echelos Bekias. Even if it's able to chew logs of wood, which means it has koyach b'shineha, so Rashi says, there's strength in its teeth. So you would think since it's able to eat, so that's some level is a good sign, right? Like person, when it comes to a person, they don't have the will to eat. Okay, so Rabbi Bar Yecheskel Imrafilo Echelos Kaitis. Even if they're able to chew on beams, it's still considered to be misukenes, because if it can't get up. The urge the animal to stand, the animal doesn't stand, even if it's in order to, even though we see it can chew on logs of wood. Okay, we're going to stop there. Let's maybe see a question. TA. Question TA4. Okay, that was actually on the top of yesterday's daf. So we said Midrabanan, yes. Midaraisa is the kasha, right? If it can transmit. So Midaraisa, Tiboyalon, Midarabanan definitely becomes a Rishon Hasheni. The question is, can we burn it? All right. TA5. B'Gemar Ma'isi Mikra and Masukenes Sharia Ma'asavadat Chassid Debi'inan Kra Lahater. Why would you think that it's usher? Right? That's the Havamina. Why? The Gemara asks, like, why would you even think that it's usher to begin with? Because the pasuk says something which is alive that you could eat, which is mashma, something which you can't. It was not alive, such as musakenes. Maybe you think you cannot eat, and that's the chiddush over there. Okay, that was TA 5. Okay, TB 8. That was the same question. This is TB 8. Let's see what I wrote. Hapasik Aimer Mikol Chayasher Taichel. Is that the Zois Chayasher? Zois Chayasher Taichel. Bazem Mashma Rak Behema Shiachel Hachia Yislam Sukenes Sheish Shashu Treif V'Asalechel. Adkan.